the story of Lyle and Eric Menendez, the infamous brothers who murdered their parents in one of the most sensationalized family crime cases in American history, is one of affluence, dysfunction, and tragedy. Their trial became a landmark event in the 1990s, exposing the dark underbelly of a seemingly perfect family and sparking debates about abuse, entitlement, and justice. Jose and Kitty Menendez appeared to have built an enviable life. Jose, a Cuban immigrant, rose from humble beginnings to become a successful entertainment executive in Beverly Hills, California. He was a self-made millionaire who demanded excellence from everyone around him, particularly his family. His wife, Kitty, had once aspired to a career in broadcasting, but instead devoted herself to supporting Jose and raising their two sons, Lyle and Eric. To outsiders, the Menendez family epitomized the American dream: wealth, status, and the trappings of success. However, behind the mansion walls, the family dynamic was far from idyllic. Jose was a strict and domineering father, prone to belittling his children. Kitty struggled with her own issues, including reported mental health challenges and substance abuse. Lyle and Eric, the beneficiaries of privilege, lived under intense pressure to meet their father's high expectations, often clashing with his overbearing nature. On the evening of August 20th, 1989, the Menendez household shattered into horror. Jose and Kitty were sitting in their family room in their Beverly Hills mansion, watching television. Suddenly, they were ambushed by their sons, who entered the room armed with 12-gauge shotguns. The attack was swift and brutal. Jose was shot in the head and chest, and Kitty was struck multiple times as she attempted to flee, sustaining fatal injuries. The scene was horrifying. Jose's body slumped on the couch, his head nearly obliterated by the close-range blast. Kitty's body lay crumpled on the floor, riddled with gunshot wounds. Blood spattered the walls and furniture, painting a grim tableau of violence. The brothers, however, went to great lengths to stage the scene as if the murders had been the result of a mob hit, believing that their father's business dealings could plausibly invite such violence. After the killings, Lyle and Eric disposed of the shotguns and spent the evening attempting to establish an alibi. They went to see the movie Batman, grabbed a meal, and later returned home, making a frantic 911 call to report the deaths. When police arrived at the scene, the brothers appeared distraught. Eric sobbed uncontrollably, while Lyle struggled to maintain composure. They claimed to have returned home to find their parents murdered. The police, initially believing the brothers' account, considered the possibility of a professional hit. There were no immediate signs of forced entry, and Jose's connections in the business world provided a plausible motive for such a crime. In the weeks following the murders, the Menendez brothers began exhibiting strange behavior. Despite their grief-stricken outward appearances, they embarked on a lavish spending spree, using their inheritance to purchase expensive cars, designer clothes, and Rolex watches. Lyle bought a restaurant in Princeton, New Jersey, while Eric hired a personal tennis coach and pursued his passion for the sport. The brothers spent approximately $700,000 in the months following the murders, raising suspicions among family members and investigators. The case took a dramatic turn when Eric, burdened by guilt, confided in his psychotherapist, Dr. Jerome Oziel. During their sessions, Eric admitted that he and Lyle had killed their parents. Oziel, recognizing the gravity of the confession, recorded their conversations and later shared them with his mistress, who subsequently alerted the police. Armed with this damning evidence, authorities arrested Lyle and Eric in March 1990. The taped confessions revealed chilling details about the murders. The brothers described how they had planned the killings, purchased the shotguns in advance, and rehearsed the crime. These revelations transformed the investigation, shattering any lingering doubts about their culpability. The Menendez brothers' trial began in 1993 and captivated the nation. The prosecution argued that the murders were premeditated and motivated by greed. With their father's wealth estimated at $14 million, the brothers stood to inherit a fortune. The prosecution painted Lyle and Eric as spoiled, entitled young men who killed their parents out of resentment and a desire for financial independence. The defense, however, presented a starkly different narrative. Attorney Leslie Abramson argued that Lyle and Eric were victims of lifelong abuse at the hands of their parents. Jose was portrayed as a tyrannical and abusive father who sexually molested Eric and possibly Lyle. Kitty was depicted as a negligent and unstable mother who enabled Jose's behavior and subjected her sons to emotional torment. The defense claimed that the murders were acts of self-defense, born out of fear that their parents would kill them if they tried to expose the abuse. The courtroom became a theater of high drama. The brothers' testimonies, detailing years of alleged physical and sexual abuse, were harrowing. Eric tearfully recounted how his father had repeatedly assaulted him, while Lyle described the psychological toll of living under Jose's oppressive rule. The defense presented corroborating evidence, including family friends and relatives who testified about the Menendez parents' controlling and abusive tendencies. The jury was deeply divided. Some jurors were swayed by the brothers' claims of abuse, while others believed the killings were cold-blooded and motivated by greed. Ultimately, two separate juries, one for each brother, were unable to reach a unanimous verdict, resulting in mistrials. In 1995, the brothers were retried. This time, the judge limited the defense's ability to present evidence of abuse, significantly weakening their case. The prosecution focused on the brothers' financial motives, emphasizing their extravagant spending after the murders. The strategy proved effective. Both Lyle and Eric were convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The verdict sparked widespread debate. Some viewed the brothers as manipulative killers who exploited claims of abuse to justify their actions. Others believed they were victims of a deeply dysfunctional family and deserved leniency. The case became a cultural touchstone, raising questions about privilege, accountability, and the complexities of family violence. Since their conviction, Lyle and Eric have remained incarcerated, serving their sentences in separate prisons for many years before being reunited in 2018. Both have expressed remorse for their actions and have tried to build productive lives behind bars. They have married, pursued education, and engaged in various prison programs. Despite their notoriety, they have garnered a surprising level of public sympathy, particularly from those who believe their abuse claims. The Menendez case continues to captivate public interest, inspiring books, documentaries, and television adaptations. It remains a chilling reminder of the darkness that can lurk behind the facade of a perfect family and the enduring impact of trauma and dysfunction. The city of Dallas in the mid-1980s was a place of growth, opportunity, and quiet suburban life. Yet beneath the sunny veneer of its North Dallas neighborhoods, a shadow lurked. Between 1986 and 1987, 3 women met horrific deaths in their own apartments, each one ending in the same chilling location, their bathroom. The man responsible, Charles Anthony Boyd, would earn the grim moniker of the Bathroom Slayer, a name forever etched into Texas true crime history. Charles Anthony Boyd was born on August 17, 1959, in Dallas, Texas. His early years were unremarkable, but his criminal tendencies surfaced early. Convicted of burglary and sexual assault in his 20s, Boyd was sentenced to 5 years in prison, a term cut short by early release in November 1985. Upon regaining his freedom, Boyd found work as a janitor at a local bank, seemingly trying to build a normal life. Yet darkness simmered beneath the surface. Boyd moved into his brother's apartment at the Woodstock Apartments, a sprawling complex in North Dallas. The community was home to many young professionals and families, their lives intersecting in the complex's shared spaces and hallways. For Boyd, it became a hunting ground. In July 1986, Tipawan Nakusan, a 37-year-old Thai immigrant, was found dead in her Woodstock apartment. She had been stabbed multiple times, her lifeless body left in the bathroom. Investigators described the scene as brutal and frenzied. The apartment showed no signs of forced entry, leading police to believe the killer either knew Nakusan or had charmed his way inside. Nakusan had moved to Dallas for a fresh start. Her life centered around her job and aspirations for the future. Her death sent shockwaves through the community, but with no immediate leads, the case grew cold. Neighbors became more vigilant, but the killer remained close. Less than 2 months later, tragedy struck again. Lashan Thomas, a vibrant 22-year-old woman with dreams of becoming a nurse, was found dead in her apartment once again at the Woodstock complex. She too had been stabbed and left in her bathroom, echoing the horror of Nakusan's murder. The similarities between the cases were undeniable, and whispers of a serial killer began to circulate. Police intensified their investigation, canvassing the area and questioning residents. Yet Boyd, living just a few units away, managed to avoid suspicion. His demeanor was unassuming, and his job as a janitor made him a familiar face. The neighborhood tightened its grip on safety, but Boyd was already planning his next attack. The crescendo of Boyd's killing spree came on April 13, 1987, with the murder of Mary Milligan. The 21-year-old recent graduate of Texas Tech University had moved to Dallas to begin her professional life. Her bright future was cut tragically short when she was attacked in her apartment at the Plaza Apartments, a complex where Boyd had recently taken up residence. Milligan's murder was particularly horrific. Boyd not only stabbed her but also sexually assaulted her before drowning her in the bathtub. The calculated cruelty left investigators shaken. This time, however, Boyd made mistakes that would lead to his capture. His proximity to the crime scene and an earlier altercation with Milligan placed him on law enforcement's radar. With 3 women dead in strikingly similar circumstances, police honed in on the pattern. The killer appeared to be targeting women in apartment complexes where he lived, gaining their trust or breaking in unnoticed. When Boyd's name surfaced in connection with Mary Milligan's murder, investigators zeroed in on him. Boyd was arrested on April 14, 1987, just 1 day after Milligan's body was discovered. During questioning, he confessed to all 3 murders. He described the premeditated nature of his attacks, the pleasure he derived from his victims' terror, and how he deliberately chose bathrooms as the final stage of his killings. For Boyd, the confined space heightened his sense of power. Charles Anthony Boyd's trial in November 1987 was swift. The evidence against him, combined with his chilling confessions, left no room for doubt. Boyd was convicted of capital murder for the killing of Mary Milligan and sentenced to death. The jury was swayed not only by the brutality of his crimes, but also by his lack of remorse. During sentencing, Boyd appeared indifferent, a stark contrast to the devastation he had caused. Boyd spent over a decade on death row at Texas's Huntsville unit. As his execution date approached, he maintained his innocence, claiming he had been coerced into confessing. On August 5, 1999, Boyd was executed by lethal injection. In his final moments, he proclaimed, "I did not do this crime," and requested a stay of execution for additional DNA testing. A request denied by the courts. He was pronounced dead at 6:16 p.m. For the families of his victims, Boyd's execution marked the end of a harrowing chapter, but could never erase the pain of their losses. The case of Charles Anthony Boyd remains a haunting reminder of how evil can hide in plain sight. A janitor and neighbor, Boyd exploited trust to commit acts of unspeakable violence. His choice of bathrooms as the stage for his murders added a uniquely horrifying layer to his crimes, leaving an indelible mark on the communities he terrorized. For Dallas, the shadow of the bathroom slayer may have faded, but the memory of his victims endures, a solemn testament to the lives taken too soon. The tale of Thomas Otis Knight, later known as Askari Abdullah Muhammad, is one of a deeply troubled individual whose descent into violence shook communities and left a trail of tragedy. Knight's life, marred by a violent upbringing and mental instability, spiraled into a series of shocking crimes, culminating in his infamous reign of terror that led him to death row. Thomas Otis Knight was born on February 4, 1951 in Fort Pierce, Florida, the second of 9 children in a home dominated by chaos and abuse. His father, a violent alcoholic, terrorized the family, leaving scars on Knight that would manifest later in life. Witnessing his sister's rape by their father and enduring regular beatings, Knight grew into a deeply troubled young man. By the age of 9, he was already known to law enforcement for petty thefts, and his criminal record only grew from there. At 19, Knight's erratic behavior earned him a commitment to the Northeast Florida State Hospital, where he was diagnosed with paranoid personality disorder. Though released, the foundations of his psyche were cracked beyond repair, setting the stage for the dark path ahead. On July 17, 1974, Knight committed a crime that would forever etch his name into Florida's criminal history. Armed with a rifle, he ambushed his employer, 64-year-old Sidney Gans, in a parking lot. Holding Gans hostage, Knight forced him to drive to his Miami Beach home, where he kidnapped Sidney's wife, Lillian. The couple, terrified but compliant, followed Knight's demands to withdraw $50,000 from a downtown Miami bank. Sidney alerted the bank staff to the situation in hushed tones, hoping for a rescue. Despite the police being informed and the FBI mobilized, Knight managed to slip away. Hours later, the Gans car was discovered at a construction site. Inside, investigators found a grim scene: Sidney and Lillian Gans, shot execution style in the neck. Knight had fled, but his rampage was far from over. Knight's arrest for the Gans murders seemed inevitable until he masterminded an audacious escape. On September 19, 1974, while awaiting trial, he and 10 other inmates broke out of the Miami-Dade County Jail. Free once again, Knight embarked on a spree of violence, leaving devastation in his wake. In October 1974, Knight committed a brutal robbery in Cordell, Georgia, where he shot and killed 59-year-old liquor store clerk William Culpepper and seriously injured another employee. With his crimes escalating in both frequency and severity, the FBI added Knight to their 10 most wanted fugitives list on December 12, 1974. The manhunt intensified, culminating in his capture on New Year's Eve 1974 in New Smyrna Beach, Florida. Found heavily armed, Knight surrendered without a fight, but his reign of terror had already claimed multiple lives. Knight's trial for the murders of Sidney and Lillian Gans ended with a conviction and a death sentence in 1975. However, even behind bars, Knight remained a dangerous presence. On October 12, 1980, Knight brutally stabbed corrections officer Richard Burke to death using a sharpened spoon. Witnesses reported that the attack stemmed from Knight's anger over perceived mistreatment during a visit from his mother. This act of violence earned Knight an additional death sentence in 1983, solidifying his reputation as one of Florida's most violent criminals. Knight's journey through the justice system was lengthy and contentious. Appeals, legal wrangling, and changing laws delayed his execution for decades. His original death sentence for the Gans murders was overturned in 1988 due to procedural errors but was reinstated after a 1996 resentencing. Meanwhile, his conviction for Officer Burke's murder remained steadfast, further sealing his fate. Knight, who converted to Islam in prison and changed his name to Askari Abdullah Muhammad, spent years on death row, making headlines occasionally with his defiant behavior and statements. After nearly 40 years, justice for Knight's victims was finally served. On January 7, 2014, he was executed by lethal injection at Florida State Prison. Before his death, Knight showed no remorse for his crimes. His execution marked the end of one of Florida's longest and most notorious death row cases. The story of Thomas Otis Knight is one of unrelenting brutality and a justice system stretched to its limits. His crimes, beginning with the cold-blooded murder of Sidney and Lillian Gans, and culminating in the killing of Officer Richard Burke, left deep scars on the families of his victims and the communities he terrorized. His case remains a stark reminder of the devastating consequences of untreated trauma and unchecked rage, as well as the challenges of delivering justice in the face of such unrepentant evil. The bond between twins is said to be unbreakable, a connection that transcends the physical, rooted in shared beginnings. But for Caleb and Ethan West, identical twins from the small, rain-soaked town of Millhaven, their connection was something darker, forged in a mix of rivalry, ambition, and a terrible schism in their souls. Caleb, the older by a mere 5 minutes, was charismatic but cold, a manipulator who found satisfaction in causing pain. Ethan, soft-spoken and idealistic, believed fervently in justice and the potential for redemption in even the most broken people. By their 30s, their paths had diverged but remained irrevocably linked. Caleb had become a police officer, patrolling the shadows of Millhaven with a badge pinned to his uniform and a growing sense of power. Ethan had become a prosecutor, using the courtroom as a sanctuary for his belief in second chances. Their career paths might have complemented one another if Caleb hadn't decided to play executioner. Ethan sat in his dimly lit office late one night, the rain tapping at the window like skeletal fingers. The day's trial still lingered in his mind. He'd argued for a lenient sentence for a man who had committed a robbery but shown genuine remorse. The judge had granted probation, and Ethan felt the familiar satisfaction of saving someone from the abyss. His phone buzzed. It was Caleb. "They'll do it again, you know." Caleb's voice drawled, thick with contempt. "That's all you're doing, letting the wolves back out to prey on the sheep." "You don't know that," Ethan replied, exhaustion creeping into his voice. "People can change, Caleb. They just need help." Caleb laughed, the sound sharp and hollow. "Help doesn't fix monsters, Ethan. Only bullets do." The line went dead, but a chill settled in Ethan's chest. Caleb's words carried a venom that unnerved him, and he couldn't shake the feeling that his brother was testing some unspoken boundary. Over the next few weeks, Millhaven's underbelly began to whisper. Suspects who had escaped arrest or received lenient sentences started disappearing. A burglar vanished on his way home from his sentencing hearing. A suspected drug dealer's car was found abandoned near the woods, its driver's seat streaked with blood. Ethan noticed the pattern almost immediately. All the missing had one thing in common. They were suspects or defendants in cases he had been involved in, and each of them had been let off with what Caleb might call a slap on the wrist. One evening, Ethan confronted Caleb at a bar near the edge of town. The place was dim and smoky, filled with the smell of stale beer and cheap cologne. Caleb leaned back in his chair, a half-empty glass of whiskey in his hand. "You think I'm behind it, don't you?" Caleb asked, smirking as though the accusation amused him. "Are you?" Ethan's voice was steady, but his fists clenched at his sides. Caleb took a slow sip of his drink. "You should be thanking me. I'm cleaning up your messes. Those people didn't deserve second chances, Ethan. They deserve justice. What you're doing, if you're doing it, is murder, Caleb. It's not justice." Caleb's smirk faded, replaced by a look of simmering anger. "You're too soft to understand. Someone has to deal with the rot in this town. You can preach your sermons in court, but out here, it's a different world. A world you don't have the stomach for." Ethan felt a wave of nausea. He wanted to believe his brother was bluffing, but Caleb's intensity, his conviction, sent a chill down his spine. Ethan's worst fears were confirmed 2 weeks later when a hiker stumbled upon a shallow grave in the woods outside Millhaven. The body belonged to one of Ethan's former defendants, a man who had been missing for nearly a month. His hands were bound, his face contorted in terror, and the autopsy revealed a single bullet wound to the head. Ethan didn't need the evidence to point to Caleb. His brother's cold eyes had said it all during their last conversation. But knowing and proving were two different things, and Caleb was careful, methodical. Driven by guilt and rage, Ethan began investigating on his own. He spent sleepless nights combing through police reports, cross-referencing Caleb's patrol routes with the disappearances. The deeper he dug, the more certain he became that his brother was a killer hiding behind a badge. One night, Ethan followed Caleb into the woods. Caleb had clocked out of his shift hours earlier, but Ethan had seen him leave the precinct with a duffel bag. It was almost midnight, and the rain was relentless, turning the dirt paths to mud. Ethan's heart pounded as he watched Caleb stop near a clearing. Caleb dropped the duffel bag to the ground and unzipped it, pulling out a bound and gagged man, another suspect Ethan had recently defended. "Caleb, stop!" Ethan's voice rang out, cutting through the downpour. Caleb froze, then turned slowly. His face was calm, almost serene. "You shouldn't be here, Ethan," he said, his tone devoid of emotion. "I can't let you do this." Ethan stepped closer, his hand trembling as he gripped the small pistol he'd brought with him. Caleb's laugh was low and bitter. "You won't stop me. You never could." The two brothers stood in the rain, their identical faces mirroring a lifetime of tension and conflict. Ethan raised his pistol. "Let him go, Caleb. Turn yourself in. We can fix this, together." "There's nothing to fix," Caleb replied, his voice calm. "This is who I am, Ethan. And deep down, it's who you are too. You just hide it behind your rules and your sermons." Ethan shook his head, his voice breaking. "I'm nothing like you." Caleb lunged, drawing his own gun in a blur of motion. The rain muffled the gunshots that followed, the sound swallowed by the storm. When the silence returned, Ethan stood trembling, his chest heaving. Caleb lay motionless at his feet, blood mixing with the rain-soaked earth. Ethan dropped to his knees, tears streaming down his face. His brother, his other half, was gone, and the bond that had tied them together since birth was severed forever. In the days that followed, Ethan confessed everything. He led authorities to Caleb's burial sites, unearthing the grim truth of his brother's crimes. But no confession or punishment could erase the weight of what Ethan had done. He had killed the only family he had left, and in doing so, he had destroyed a part of himself. Ethan resigned from his position as prosecutor and left Millhaven, carrying the scars of his brother's darkness and his own impossible choices. He spent the rest of his days haunted by the question, was Caleb right? Was there a darkness in him too? The woods of Millhaven whispered no answers, only the echoes of two brothers bound by blood, torn apart by fate. In the quiet corridors of the Louis A. Johnson Veterans Medical Center in Clarksburg, West Virginia, patients and their families expected care, compassion, and safety. These were men who had served their country, enduring the horrors of war, only to find themselves in the twilight of their lives under the care of strangers. But within those sterile hospital walls lurked a predator, a woman who wielded her position of trust to commit unspeakable acts. Rita Phyllis Mays, a nursing assistant at the VA Medical Center, worked the night shift, a time when the hospital was quiet, when patients were most vulnerable, and when the shadow of death could pass unnoticed. Over the course of a year, Mays systematically administered lethal doses of insulin to at least 7 elderly veterans in her care, turning her assigned duty to heal into a chilling reign of terror. Born on June 16, 1975 in Reynoldsville, West Virginia, Rita Mays lived a life that, on the surface, seemed unremarkable. She served in the West Virginia National Guard, deploying to Iraq and Kuwait between 2003 and 2004. Her military service was followed by a stint as a corrections officer at the North Central Regional Jail in Greenwood, West Virginia. It was during her time as a corrections officer that a darker side began to emerge. Mays was implicated in a lawsuit alleging excessive force against an inmate, a case ultimately dismissed, but hinting at a simmering propensity for cruelty. By 2015, she had found her way into the medical profession, taking on the role of a nursing assistant at the VA Medical Center. The VA Medical Center catered primarily to aging military veterans, many of whom were in fragile health. It was here, working the night shift, that Mays carried out her crimes. Her victims were elderly men who had served their country in wars ranging from World War II to Vietnam. They were fathers, husbands, and grandfathers. Each of these men had survived the horrors of war, only to meet their end in a place meant to offer healing and care. Mays administered unprescribed doses of insulin, an act that caused sudden and catastrophic drops in blood sugar levels, leading to their deaths. By mid-2018, the staff at the VA Medical Center began noticing an unsettling pattern. A seemingly disproportionate number of deaths were occurring during Mays's shifts. Autopsies revealed unexplained insulin levels in the blood of several deceased patients, many of whom were not diabetic and had no reason to receive the drug. The Department of Veterans Affairs Office of Inspector General, OIG, in collaboration with the FBI, launched an investigation. A chilling detail emerged. Mays was present during each of these suspicious deaths. Families of the deceased veterans were devastated as suspicions mounted. "We trusted them to take care of him," said one family member of a victim. And instead, they let someone kill him. On July 14, 2020, Rita Mays was arrested and charged with 7 counts of second-degree murder and 1 count of assault with intent to commit murder. Her arrest shocked the community, where she had been known as a quiet, unassuming figure. During questioning, Mays initially denied any involvement but later admitted to injecting her patients with insulin. In her confession, Mays offered no clear motive. She claimed to have struggled with PTSD from her time in the military and said that she didn't know why she committed the murders. Her lack of remorse or understanding of her actions only deepened the horror of her crimes. Rita Mays' trial unfolded in the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of West Virginia. During the proceedings, prosecutors painted a picture of a cold and calculating killer who preyed on the defenseless. The courtroom was filled with families of the victims, who spoke of their loved ones' bravery in life and the betrayal they suffered in death. One daughter of a victim tearfully recounted, "My father survived bombs and bullets, only to be killed by a woman he trusted to care for him." Mays pleaded guilty to all charges, avoiding a trial, but not the wrath of the families or the public. Her admission of guilt offered little solace to those left behind, grappling with the senselessness of her actions. On May 11, 2021, Rita Mays was sentenced to 7 consecutive life terms plus 20 years. The judge condemned her actions as a breach of the public's trust of the highest order, and noted that her crimes caused immeasurable suffering to the families of her victims. Mays was also ordered to pay restitution to the families, though no amount of money could undo the pain she had caused. The case of Rita Mays stands as a grim reminder of the vulnerability of those in institutional care and the importance of vigilance, even in places meant to provide sanctuary. The veterans who fell victim to her cruelty deserve dignity and peace in their final days. 2 things Mays ruthlessly stole from them. For the families, the scars of her betrayal remain. The trust placed in her was shattered, leaving a haunting question. How could someone sworn to care and heal become the silent angel of death?